Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar. This webinar is a presentation of Clean Energy Group's Resilient Power Project, and the topic of this webinar is Bringing the Benefits of Solar to Affordable Housing, the California Nonprofit Solar Stakeholders Coalition Plan. And this is part one of a two-part series. We will be having the next half of this webinar next Thursday at the same time, so we hope you can join us for both. Before we get started with this webinar, and we've got a few excellent guest speakers with us today, we have just a few housekeeping notes for you. All of our participants for this webinar are in listen-only mode. You have a couple of options to join the audio portion of this webinar. You can either call in using your telephone, or you can connect using your computer, mic, and speakers. A very important note, we ask that you please submit your questions as you think of them throughout the webinar by typing them into the question box on your webinar console and hitting send. We will be reading through your questions as they come in, and we will save some time at the end of our webinar for a Q&A with the audience, and we'll be selecting your questions throughout the webinar to answer at the end. Please type them in as you think of them. It gives you a better chance that we will get to it. A final note, this webinar is being recorded. You will find a recording of this webinar as well as our previous webinars on our website at resilient-power.org. And we will also send you a follow-up email with a link to the webinar recording and the slides. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to our host for this webinar, Seth Mullendorf. Seth is a project director here at Clean Energy Group, and he will be introducing our guest speakers and talking a bit more about our webinar today. Seth?
Thank you, Sam, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I just want to start with a brief introduction of who we are here, the Clean Energy Group and a Resilient Power Project. Resilient Power Project is a joint project brought to you by Clean Energy Group and Meridian Institute. It is funded by the generous support of several foundations, which are listed here. Clean Energy Group has been around for about 20 years, working towards advocating for innovation and development of clean energy technologies. It also has a sister organization, the Clean Energy States Alliance, which is a coalition of state agencies and organizations that manage statewide energy, clean energy programs. So to give you a bit of an introduction about the Resilient Power Project itself, Resilient Power Project has been around for about 3 years now, and the goal of the project really is to increase the deployment of solar and storage technologies primarily as a resilient power alternative for disadvantaged communities. This is resiliency both in providing emergency power to critical loads when there's an outage, as well as economic resiliency by providing savings for bills and being able to participate in revenue opportunities through the technologies. We do a lot of things to increase public and private investment in clean energy and resilient technologies, as well as engaging people in spreading information and webinars like this, and newsletters and reports that we put out. Like I said, we have a focus on low-income and vulnerable communities, and it tends to be affordable housing, as well as critical facilities that support those communities, so whether it's police stations, fire stations, emergency shelters, and the like. We also have a technical assistance fund, so people that are developing resilient power projects, we can help with some of the pre-development costs, the technical and financial feasibility. We have a lot of resources for people that are working in resilient power or want to learn more, and then those can be found on our website, resilient-power.org. I encourage anyone who's interested in the project to please check out the website. We have a number of examples of projects that have been installed, as well as developing projects all across the country, and links to all of our webinars, reports, and other things. So here's a screenshot of the website, so go check that out. Now I'd like to introduce our speakers today. This is a great webinar we're going to have. Really, this is an innovative program that I think can be a model for the rest of the country in a way to get these advanced clean energy technologies to low-income communities. So first up, we're going to have Wayne Waite of Waite & Associates. Wayne was formerly the Regional Energy and Climate Manager for the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and has recently served as Policy Director for the California Housing Partnership Corporation, where he contributed to the development of the proposal for implementing AB 693, which we'll talk about today. We also have Strella Service with us, and she is the co-director of the California Environmental Justice Alliance, or CEJA, which is a leading environmental justice coalition that fights to bring renewable energy, good jobs, and clean air into impacted neighborhoods. Strella manages the energy equity and civic engagement programs for CEJA and helps to pass historic environmental justice policies such as AB 693. We also have with us today Eddie Ahn, and he is the executive director of Brightline Defense, which is a policy and legal advocacy nonprofit. Prior to being a nonprofit attorney, he was with an AmeriCorps member serving as an after-school programmer in Oakland's Chinatown. And while working on his law degree, he taught art and public speaking workshops for youth and coordinated on civil justice environmental issues for the Assembly Judiciary Committee and the UC Hastings Legislation Clinic in Sacramento. He has also assisted with multiple municipalities across the country in workforce development and analysis of federal constitutional law. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Wayne to introduce our presentation today.
And thank you very much, Seth. What my role here is initially is to kind of introduce the coalition and kind of tell you about the coalition's work, why we came together, and a bit about AB 693. The coalition's proposal that we submitted to implement AB 693 provides comprehensive vision and framework for integrating energy efficiency, solar PV, and energy storage. It addresses a lot of the specialized needs in disadvantaged communities known as DACs in California. There's some strategies within the proposal to promote economic development and job creation and job placement. And the proposal includes an incentive structure to ensure that projects are financially feasible and can be supported by the affordable housing property owners. So to get started, I wanted to first cover some of the basics about AB 693, and I'm just having a little bit of difficulty advancing a slide here.
Looks like it's going just a bit slowly.
Okay, that's great. So the basics of 693 is that it provides, a funding structure for up to $100 million a year for 10 years. The source of the funding is cap and trade revenues from the climate credit account, and it's specifically targeted towards affordable multifamily housing and rent-restricted properties. Importantly, some of the specific goals of the program are to make clean energy technologies more accessible to low-income and disadvantaged communities, and to provide local economic benefits to disadvantaged communities and also to renters, and to install solar systems to reflect geographic diversity really throughout the state. AB 693 contains several new mandates and requirements that affect the program design and offer pathways for more innovative and complete energy strategies to benefit low-income renters. So it represents really a big step in providing kind of more complete programs. So with respect to the core goals of the program, it's not just about installing a particular level of solar capacity to a single housing market, but it's also to create access and lower energy bills of low-income tenants, and to facilitate economic development and actually job placement. The program is also not just focused on property or property owners, but is primarily focused on rental units and the green technology gaps in disadvantaged communities, and in providing statewide programmatic access to low-income renters. The outputs and the outcomes of the program under shared benefits here, they must be shared with all parties. And for the first time, the allocation of the generation of the solar program must primarily go to the renters. The renters must receive an economic benefit or credit on their bill. And the legislation calls for the tariff structure to provide a continuing and direct economic benefit to the low-income tenants. With respect to the program scope, the scope is directed, is not focused on a single technology, but rather the program must facilitate integrated investments with energy efficiency and solar PV, and the program may also include energy storage. And to address the financial barriers and really the split incentives, the incentive structure must be aligned with both the cost of the solar installations and the resources leveraged and the contributions from the property. And in other words, the financial pro forma for the energy investment must balance. There should be no added burden on the property owner that might steer them into a particular financial mechanism. With respect to the coalition members include the California Housing Partnership Corporation, the California Environmental Justice Alliance, Brightline Defense Project, the National Housing Law Project, and the Natural Resource Defense Council. These were the core members of the group submitting the proposal to the California Public Utilities Commission, but I would be remiss in not mentioning that our group received a lot of support from organizations such as the Energy Foundation, the Asian Pacific Environmental Network, Clean Energy Group, the California Center for Sustainable Energy, Communities for Better Environment, Green Lining Institute, and Grid Alternatives. All these organizations contributed a lot in the thinking and really the fleshing out of some of the concepts within the program proposal. The predicates for our work together included a lot of shared mission and values. There was really strong common interest in ensuring that the benefits of the program go to the intended beneficiaries and not to other parties. And we also had a mutual need to work together to build capacity because this program and the legislation itself was quite complex, and there were a number of programmatic issues to wrestle with. In terms of the coalition's work, the partnership was guided by developing a program design compatible with the following principles. First, fair and equal access to program resources for all low-income renters residing in qualified properties. The development of comprehensive energy solutions responsive to the long-term energy needs of low-income renters, and also the changing utility policies and tariffs affecting property owners and residents. And then lastly, the really need to provide funding choices to the property owners that optimize the economic benefits and safeguard the financial stability of the property owner and the tenants. So with that kind of context, the coalition members began working together on the CPUC proceeding. We submitted a comprehensive proposal on August the 3rd. The proposal was over 100 pages, and there were also accompanying appendices supporting the coalition's analysis. The next steps we're now waiting for a proposed decision from the California Public Utilities Commission, and so our efforts are continue to be ongoing. With that, I'd like to kind of introduce the next speaker, Strela. Servas from the California Environmental Justice Alliance, and she will cover the next topic.
Thank you, Wayne. Before I get into specific program targeting, I wanted to just set a framework and let you know a little bit more about the California Environmental Justice Alliance. CEJA is a statewide community-led alliance that works to achieve environmental justice by advancing policy solutions. We represent around 30,000 community members statewide, and we unite the powerful organizing of our members in the communities that are most impacted by environmental hazards in low-income communities and communities of color, and we work to create comprehensive opportunities for change at a statewide level. We really got into working on AB 693 because for us it was about equity. A lot of the renewable energy and green economy programs out there are promoted to promise low-income communities the benefits of renewable energy. In fact, the way to address this is looking at the polls. 80 to 90% of people of color consider themselves environmentalists and think that climate change will impact their neighborhoods, and they demand action on climate change from our elected officials. However, only less than 1% of renewable energy programs in California have gone into disadvantaged communities. And so we see a lot of the renewable energy in big solar farms in the desert and in affluent communities outside of areas that are most impacted by climate and energy. And so we worked on AB 693 to address what we call this green divide and these particular gaps. So moving on to geographic program targeting, the multifamily solar roofs program was intended to be broadly available to qualified, affordable multifamily rental properties. The legislation itself directs, requires that resources be allocated to, quote, install those systems in a manner that represents the geographic diversity of the state. This requirement does not necessarily mean first come, first serve approach, but instead it calls for allocations to be made using a broad set of geographically based considerations, including how resources are distributed between qualified multifamily properties that are located both in disadvantaged communities and qualified properties that are located outside of disadvantaged communities. And I'll talk about disadvantaged communities in the next few slides. Disadvantaged communities in the statute requires that it must be identified by the California Environmental Protection Agency. And what we have been using, or a preference is, and proposal is to use what is called the CalEnviroScreen. The CalEnviroScreen identifies communities in California most burdened by pollution from multiple sources and most vulnerable to its effects, taking into account socioeconomic characteristics and underlying health status. There are 19 different indicators that are scored for almost 8,000 census tracts in California, and these indicators are in broad categories of burden of pollution, population characteristics, and then underneath that, under burden of pollution, exposures and environmental effects, and under population characteristics, sensitive populations, and socioeconomic factors. The CalEnviroScreen provides a broad picture of the relative burdens in California communities from pollution, and it uses the top 25% of the most impacted census tracts. This is a shot of a CalEnviroScreen model, and I wanted to give you a picture of what it looks like in the map, on the map. So again, this map shows the top 25% census tracts that are most impacted and therefore should be prioritized for investments. And you'll see those top 25% in the red areas there. I won't get too much into detail around CalEnviroScreen, but what it does is it will help us identify communities, again, that need to be prioritized for these investments. While AB 693 does not prescribe a requirement that the multifamily solar roofs program adopt funding allocations or specific megawatts, capacity targets based on whether a property is located in a disadvantaged community or outside of a disadvantaged community, we recommend a geographic program that targets based on funding allocations. And we think that an equitable distribution of funding between the disadvantaged community and the non-disadvantaged community properties will further the goal to install qualified systems in a manner that represents the geographic diversity of the state. So if we take this approach, we as a coalition have specifically recommended that the funding targets be set on the percentage of eligible properties that are located in CalEnviroScreen disadvantaged communities and a percent of qualified properties located outside of qualified CalEnviroScreen communities. In this regard, the number of qualified multifamily properties in disadvantaged communities is approximately 30% of the total qualified multifamily properties in investor-owned utility jurisdictions, as if we use a statewide ranking of the CalEnviroScreen. Assuming CalEnviroScreen is used on a statewide basis for multifamily solar roofs, the 30% of that would be 30% of the program's funding on an annual basis allocated for use in disadvantaged communities. However, if we use a investor-owned utility service territory or some combination of a service territory, then the Commission would need to calculate the new percentage of disadvantaged community eligible buildings and adjust the funding allocation accordingly. And we have also looked a lot at non-disadvantaged community considerations as well. There are a number of multifamily affordable homes that might fall outside of these CalEnviroScreen census tracts. Our coalition has had a lot of conversation to capture these communities. And in fact, AB 693 says that qualified multifamily affordable housing must meet one of the following. So in a disadvantaged community, which I had talked about the definition, and then also in a low-income area where at least 80% of the tenants have income at or below 60% of the area median income. These two are communities that have the most financial barriers to accessing solar and also should be prioritized in this program. We have also discussed a lot of other targeting considerations. In addition to allocating incentive dollars according to disadvantaged community versus non-disadvantaged designations, we think that there should be some tracking reservations and installations to ensure the geographic diversity throughout California. The distribution of solar installations and funding commitments is important in terms of whether the project is in urban, suburban, and rural communities, which is reflected in a lot of the state of California. While we don't necessarily recommend specific funding or megawatt targets based on these and or other geographic designations, we recommend that there are efforts to ensure that low-income multifamily building owners and tenants in all geographic settings benefit from AB 693, and this approach could be similar to what we've seen in California's FASH program for single-family homes, and efforts should be made to ensure that all counties within the state benefit from the program in investments. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Eddie.
Unmuting now. Hi, this is Eddie On, Executive Director of Brightline Defense, and before starting the next 3 slides, I thought some basic framing would be helpful. Brightline Defense, by way of introduction, is based in California. We're a public policy nonprofit comprising of lawyers with blended skill sets. We blend legal research and analysis, policy advocacy, and organizing as an ability to push for progressive policymaking in workforce development and environmental issues in particular. A lot of our work has been made possible nationally by the CERDNA Foundation, which has let us touch different urban jurisdictions in particular in New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, to look at local hiring policies in particular. AB 693 represents a really tremendous opportunity to low-income communities in California, and due to the tremendous coordination efforts of Strela in particular, we've seen how in this filing a number of organizations have been brought together and would like to also thank Wayne for bringing together these diverse stakeholders, SEHA, CHPC, NRDC, and National Housing Law Project. So the second foundational principle is just talking about local hiring in general. Why local hire? Local hiring represents itself opportunity to create job guarantees for residents who are impacted by local economic development. In the world of workforce development, which is a policy wonky term itself, there's often a barrier or division of sorts between job training and job placement strategies. And oftentimes there's nothing more debilitating to a community than to train up for a job that does not exist. So a lot of this work is about trying to ensure that economic benefits go to local low-income communities as they see, for instance, a project go up in their neighborhood, that using geography to target such communities becomes an important part of the discussion. So in starting this filing, we focused on three major principles, first of which is data collection, the idea of looking at specific demographic targets and figuring out how to even set local hiring policies across the state of California, which is a geographically very diverse region, is part of the challenge. Another foundational principle is job placement, looking, again, what I talked to earlier, at more how to figure out job guarantees for communities that have normally not had access to such work. And third and finally is the foundational principle of career pathways, making sure that the job is just not any old job, but a good paying job, a job that offers opportunities to advance far beyond just basic entry-level work and offer accordingly increased wages and benefits as well. Oops, skipped over a slide. So local residency itself is worth defining, first of all. In the filing itself that we've all engaged in, local residency was defined as an individual residing in the same county as a project or individual hired from a job training organization located in the same county as the project. And functionally, what this will ultimately mean is looking at prioritizing hiring from three worker pools, first of which is CalEnviroScreen, which Brightline considers to be an important tool for considering cumulative impacts of disadvantaged communities, and currently is going through a robust public process to make that as all-encompassing as possible across the state. And also, the second pool would be low-income communities, looking at folks of a certain AMI to make sure that they have access to such jobs. And third and finally, disadvantaged workers, which borrows from a definition of San Francisco's local hiring policy for construction, and it focuses on several different categories: homeless, single parent, no GED diploma, public assistance, or having a criminal record or connection to the criminal justice system. It's also good to go over the report, the actual data collection requirement, which will provide a lot of the foundation for creating local hiring policies across the state. Generally, when looking at solar installation work, energy efficiency work, a lot of the work is coordinated not necessarily by FTE or PTE as metrics, but worker hours. So looking at that particular breakdown is really important by amount of local workers, by amount of disadvantaged workers. Minority is actually a dated term. Probably looking by race and gender is more appropriate, given that California is has become a minority-majority state. And also looking at other data collection points of job retention, how long do workers stay on the job, wages and benefits, the types of local hiring policies that are applicable. Local hiring policies can range from good faith local hire to mandatory local hire, like San Francisco's local hiring policy construction. And the final category is one about tracking employee travel time, just generally as a principle, making sure that long commute times don't unnecessarily burden low-income, mid-income communities is becoming increasingly important in this day and age. And to collect all this data, we also need to look at the reporting system needs. So a lot of this is meant to be data entry points that contractors can understand. Certified payroll reports, for instance, are industry standards that are often used. And there should be flexibility within that reporting system in terms of tracking different local hiring policies, particularly as HUD has moved in this direction as well. HUD, for instance, has taken on data collection requirements, and it is now thoroughly tracking the level of HUD resident participation on its particular construction and maintenance projects. And finally is the last few talking points focus on job placement, that a recognition that job training requirements already exist in the SASH and MASH program, creating the pool of workers that we need. What's now needed is looking at active job placement, which is essential for long-lasting economic benefits to disadvantaged communities. So to get to that job placement, proactive reach is really necessary to local workforce investment boards and job training organizations. There are several very good ones that exist across the state of California, including Grid Alternatives, Asian Neighborhood Design, SF Conservation Corps, Rising Sun Energy Center, and there are many, many others that work locally within their own counties. In other words, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. Part of what's needed is, at a bare minimum, a notification system, a way to figure out how contractors can fill their open positions with qualified local residents through the existing workforce development infrastructure. The second major thing, as I mentioned earlier, was career pathways, making sure that there are prevailing wages on appropriately leveraged projects, and then ultimately the tracking of workers to figure out, as they move up in classifications, what jobs, types of jobs are they moving into. And to wrap it all up, at the end of 3 years, there's a recommendation to create a report to the California Public Utilities Commission to figure out what's been the benefits created by AB 693 to make sure that ultimately underemployed, unemployed communities, disadvantaged communities, our communities get jobs and get them now. And at that point, I'll pass it off to program administration.
Okay, this is Waite once again. I'll cover the concluding section today on program administration. On our next webinar, we'll be covering energy efficiency, energy storage, and the incentive structure. So with respect to program administration, there were two, in a sense, pathways or options that were offered in the legislation. One was for third-party administrators. The second was administration by a utility electrical corporation. In determining what structure is most appropriate for the program, there are obviously a number of factors that should be considered, and in fact were considered by many of the parties in the proceeding. These include what structure provides the best alignment with the statutory goals of the program, and in particular addressing the barriers to low-income renters and communities. Another important factor is, does the structure provide sufficient technical capacity to support the program requirements? And here there are a number of compliance issues associated with this particular program that would need to be addressed. There are also specialized needs within disadvantaged communities and underserved markets that would need some attention, and there are multiple program elements like energy efficiency, PV installation, and energy storage that would need to be considered as part of kind of a delivery implementation framework. And also, we want to make sure and ensure that the structure that's ultimately adopted is efficient, consistent, and flexible enough to address the really long-term needs of the program. Again, this is a 10-year program, and the environment for these types of investments and installations is undoubtedly going to change over the over a 10-year period, and we want to avoid conflicts of interest. Now, each of the different options offers has relative strengths and advantages. In developing our proposal, we conducted a literature search and on really evaluating the merits of different kind of administrative structures. And we found a couple studies, one by ACEEE, another by Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratories, on the administrative structures and evaluation of the administrative structures for energy efficiency programs. And these studies looked at, again, the differences and the advantages or disadvantages, pros and cons of third-party structures as well as utility-administered structures. And so from these studies, what's shown here on the slide are some of the advantages and disadvantages or strengths of the respective approaches. The third-party structure, these studies found, showed really strong alignment with program goals, particularly programs that are set up around, important kind of policy principles or particular missions. Third-party administration offers opportunities for greater consistency and coordination of program elements, greater economies of scale for delivery, and also importantly here, I think, capacity for specialized services supporting program delivery. Many of these third-party administrators are nonprofit organizations, or at least the studies found that they were. And these nonprofits were recognized within the context of the programs that they were serving as really trusted independent authorities. On the utility administration side, utility companies already have existing customer relationships, which is a really important component. And within California, there are clearly established program structures that need to be looked at and in terms of their potential application to this program. And utility companies also have in-house expertise and specialized skills in accounting, marketing, and program evaluation, which are, again, important, I think, to the service delivery. The coalition itself tried to identify some areas that it was particularly interested in and really, again, evaluating the merits of the different options. And we were especially interested in what structure was best suited to providing broad geographic diversity and programmatic access, particularly proportional coverage in disadvantaged communities throughout the state, and really achieving statewide geographic diversity goals that are set out in the program. We also wanted to know what structures could best reduce barriers to clean energy technologies and job creation or placement, and particularly through technical assistance to meet specialized needs in disadvantaged communities or underserved areas, and really creating and facilitating pathways and connections for job placement. We also were concerned and wanted to look at the structures in terms of what structure best enabled comprehensive energy solutions, and by that I mean providing technical support to facilitate a variety of different energy investments, and also the integration of energy efficiency, PV, and energy storage investments. And finally, we looked at the structure from the standpoint of consumer protection and really what structure might best safeguard program participants and ratepayer interests. And so structures that offered consumer protection to mitigate financial risks, and structures that allowed for kind of more independent alignment to ensure alignment of the incentives for the program and other resources and costs, and independent verification of tenant benefits. All these things were important to coalition members. Our conclusion of of our assessment was that we thought that concluded that the third-party administration structure offered overwhelming advantages. The established California solar programs, the existing models themselves, we did not think offered useful models for providing technical support and assistance. In fact, the current structures don't do that. Or offer means for integrating various kind of energy programs and resources, particularly energy efficiency. In that regard, there have been a number of proceedings, I think, in California where attempts have been made to really kind of integrate energy efficiency resources across different kind of programmatic silos, and it has been quite a difficult enterprise. And so, again, we didn't think that the existing structures were particularly meritorious in and provided a compelling argument for kind of retaining a utility administration. We thought, on the contrary, that the statewide administration was a preferable pathway for developing and implementing coordinating strategies, particularly in disadvantaged communities and meeting geographic diversity goals. And we also thought that the statewide administration would offer a consistent set of requirements statewide and a means and mechanisms for developing approaches to meeting objectives like local hiring, integrating energy programs, and again, safeguarding the public trust. So having kind of completed that assessment, we also took a look at what existing models were out there that might enable kind of an implementation of a kind of a statewide program. And fortunately in California, we found that there was in fact a model, that a new program that had been kind of launched, the California Low-Income Weatherization Program. This is not the Department of Energy weatherization program. It's actually kind of it's built on that platform, but it provides, in a sense, a more kind of comprehensive framework. In this case, this program is funded from cap and trade funds. It provides targeting to disadvantaged communities. The program integrates solar PV with energy efficiency. It has a very hefty and a fairly remarkable technical assistance component, which is really essential to affordable housing markets in kind of assisting with the decision making and just the developing of financing strategies. And again, this TA component is administered and delivered effectively statewide. And within this program, there's also efforts to link and leverage other energy efficiency resources that are offered by utility companies. So we think that this intermediary strategy that has been kind of put into place through this framework would be an effective approach for delivering. So it, in a sense, validated the premise that and conclusions that we were making regarding third-party administration. So within our proposal, we made some recommendations that the Commission adopt a third-party administrator model similar to LIWIP, and that the implementation of that be conducted through an RFQ or an RFP process, again, similar to what occurred statewide with LIWIP for the multifamily housing markets. And that as part of that development of the RFQ, RFP, that the Commission also include nonprofit organizations to assist in developing selection criteria for the Commission. So in other words, allowing organizations to participate as an advisory committee to the Commission in a sense, recommending selection criterion factors. So that concludes the program and administration component, our discussion, and we can then move on, I think, to questions from the audience.
Great. Thank you, Wayne, and thank you to Estrella and Eddie as well. A lot of great information in there, and I know there's a lot of information to throw at everyone. We have a lot of attendees today. Anyone that has not looked at the proposal, I strongly urge you. The proposal is linked in the webinar description that we have for today, and all of our presenters today, I can help you also find a copy of the proposed implementation plan that they're talking about today if you haven't had a chance to look at it. So with that, I'm going to open it up to questions. If you haven't entered your questions yet, please do so now. Estrella, you mentioned the CalEnviroScreen. I was wondering for people that are here from states outside of California, are you aware of any metrics that are similar to the CalEnviroScreen? Does EPA have any methodology where you can do the same kind of disadvantaged community analysis?
That's a great question. California was actually the first to create such screening tool or methodology. So I think other states are modeling, are looking to California and CalEnviroScreen to model their own type of screening methodology after ours. I know that New York is developing a similar one for use in energy programs and energy efficiency programs such as the programs that we have in California. But I know that they're looking at, as sort of a comprehensive tool. I don't know if it's going to be as comprehensive as the 19 different indicators, but California would be the first, and the only other one that I know of that is in development right now is New York.
Okay, great. And we did actually have one of our attendees said that the EPA does have a tool called the EJ Screen. I'm not familiar with that tool, but that might be something for people to look into as well. Wayne, maybe you can speak a little bit more about the intent of the technical assistance that you talked about in the program administration. This is aimed at property owners. What exactly is the primary intent of the technical assistance, and what's it meant to achieve?
Well, it's aimed at property owners, but also at the low-income residents. As we were doing our kind of stakeholder outreach and trying to kind of formulate and gather ideas for the proposal, and what we were told is that certainly many of the property owners have really technical questions about the financing and funding of these projects. In the case of AB 693, while we anticipate the residents side of the PV system to be heavily subsidized and funded, on the property owner side, the property owner would be making contributions. So the property owners really do need credible and objective information about really what the energy savings cash flows would likely be under a solar PV or a combined solar PV and battery storage kind of setup. So analytical resources and tools such as that become very important on the property owner side. The low-income tenants obviously, I think, need really information about the benefits that they might receive or would receive under the program, and really how it works, and we're also talking about integrating energy efficiency. So we really want the property and the residents of the system to kind of buy into energy improvements. I think to facilitate that process, again, some technical assistance is needed, and the LIWIP model is just, if the audience is not familiar with the Department of Community Services Development low-income weatherization program for large multifamily, you should really check this out. It's a very thoughtful program. There's really upfront technical resources in defining and developing a menu of cost-effective energy efficiency measures, and again, support for linking, funding that scope of work and leveraging resources from other energy efficiency programs, including LIWIP, but other utility programs as well. And it really provides a very kind of combined and thoughtful strategy for kind of advancing an energy efficiency agenda. So those resources are very important. And so we thought that, again, back to the administrative structure, we were looking for a structure that would enable technical support and capacity building, such as that, to successfully implement the program.
Great, thank you, Wayne. So on the local hiring side, Eddie, there was a question specifically about if you have a solar contractor that that doesn't have an office within 50 miles of the property location, do they still the contractors still need to provide the documentation for local hiring practices? How would that work?
Sorry, that's within 50 miles of which location? The actual project?
So the property location. So the contractor is located, doesn't have an office nearby where the property location is. I think that's just a question of will they have access to providing the documentation for the local hiring practices?
Yeah, so the measurement of distance is more of a focus between the project location itself and the workforce development system that exists within the county. So it's really a question of whether the workforce development system exists within wherever the project location is going to happen. So it's regardless of whether the contractor has an office, to make it clear.
Okay, great. So question about community solar. As I understand this program, it's really looking to put solar on the facilities themselves. Has there been any, or has there been consideration of having off-site community solar in these projects?
Seth, this is Wayne. I think on this point, and we did, I think, consider and look at community solar as we were developing the proposal. We believed that the legislation itself called for, in a sense, installations at multifamily sites. So the solar installations and other types of investments would be conducted at a particular property site. That said, within our proposal, we recommended that there could be shared solar, again through California's virtual net metering policies, shared solar amongst combined sites. So if a property owner had, let's say, multiple sites within a county, and one of the sites was well suited for solar and could be really scaled to a large extent, we thought that it might be possible to share some of the solar generation with other properties in proximity through a virtual net metering type of convention. So we did include that as a recommendation in our proposal.
Interesting. So would that be limited to properties just owned by the same developer? Could it be multiple? Yeah,
we were not specific on that. We thought that if there were properties, owned by the same, housing organization or such, it would be certainly simpler to facilitate. But we didn't exclude other options.
Great. So let's see. We've got a number of questions here. Question about the housing provider that has 1,700 units in Central Coast of California, existing properties that could use solar and new properties in development or in construction. Can the program be applied to all of the properties, or is it just for properties in a certain phase, existing properties, or is this applicable to new properties as well?
This is Wayne again. The program is open to both new construction and existing properties.
Great. Question here, I'm not sure if anyone can address this, but it's an interesting question about the Clean Power Plan's Clean Energy Investment Program, so the early credits for clean energy investments that has there's this extra credit for efficiency measures and for clean energy solar installation in low-income communities. Do you see the AB 693, the multifamily solar roofs program, as a good model for the Clean Energy Investment Program under the Clean Power Plan?
Srela or Eddie, did you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I have not looked at the intersection between AB 693 and the Clean Power Plan. There might be somebody within our coalition that is looking at that, so I can't say. It might be too early to say that unless somebody else, another panelist, has a response.
Seth, this is Wayne again. I think that it could be a useful model. I think with probably several caveats. The Clean Power Plan itself, I think, is kind of more broadly stated, and the focus on low-income eligibility under the Clean Power Plan is not restricted to affordable housing. So AB 693 and the Solar Roofs program is certainly very focused on that market segment. So there would, the first reaction I have is that you would need to kind of broaden the framework, I think, to reach kind of other lower income households, inclusive of low-income households living outside of apartment buildings, possibly. So it would require kind of a more broader construction, but I think that some of the principles within AB 693 would be applicable, particularly the integration of energy efficiency and PV. That's very important, and I think the framework that's offered in the proposal really could have applications in many other states. Thanks.
Yes, great. Thank you, Wayne. It looks like we're just about out of time here. I think we all have time for maybe one more question, and then I think we'll wrap things up. This question talks about if anyone's working to resolve a paradox that exists for low-income administrators who lose tax credits as their energy expenses are reduced. Not sure if they're thinking about housing administrators or if this is. I know there is an issue with low-income tenants that with the utility adjustment allowance. But not sure if there's a larger issue there also with housing developers as well.
Seth, this is Wayne. I don't know that I completely understand the question, but assuming with respect to the low-income housing tax credits, we'll be addressing a bit more of that kind of question in the next webinar when we talk about the incentive structure. Within the requirements of the program, there is a very specific requirement that the incentive structure for AB 693 take account of resources that are on the table, that is available to the property, that are provided to the property for that solar investment. So if there is a low-income housing tax credit program that is financing or supporting the solar installation, those credits would need to be accounted for in the sense of the incentive, setting the incentive level for AB 693, and our proposal and other proposals attempted to address the instances where tax credits and other housing tax credits and investment tax credits are being leveraged as along with the AB 693 funding. So
great, thank you, Wayne.
Thanks.
Yeah. No, I didn't quite understand the question and wondered if maybe you did more. But as Wayne said, this is the first of a two-part webinar series. So we're going to go into a lot more into efficiency, energy storage, and the actual allocation of tenant benefits and how the program incentive structure is set up and the considerations in that. That will be next week, next Thursday, at the same time. So I hope to have you guys back there. Thank you, all of our presenters. Thank you, Wayne and Strella and Eddie. Really appreciate this. I encourage people to reach out to them if they have more specific questions on any of this, or you can reach out to Clean Energy Group and we'll connect you with the right person. So thank you all for joining us. I'm going to turn it back over to Sam for some closing remarks.
Thanks, Seth, and thank you everybody for joining us today for this webinar. There's some contact info on your screen for where you can reach Seth and the rest of us at Clean Energy Group. And I also wanted to invite everyone to join us next week for part 2 of this webinar. Thanks, everyone.